Hi team. So just before you listen to this one, summary is this is an awesome episode to listen to just because Nicol, he wasn't scared to tell you his story. And actually in the process, we uncover a lot, especially around meaning, purpose and acceptance and what that actually looks like, because we often don't actually see how acceptance ties in when we're so focused on motivation and discipline. And we uncovered a really cool conversation as we go with this, as well as a bit of fun with Don's technical challenges and inviting someone else and using the wrong email and them joining in right at the very beginning. And I was going to edit it out, but actually at the end of the day, we started this podcast for a bit of fun and journey, and so you guys can follow along and as we go. So I'm going to leave that in just to add a bit of excitement and see how we react. But other than that, great episode. Enjoy. I hope you do enjoy it as much as I do.
So welcome back to the Identity Human podcast with your host, Don. No Ray today, but we do have a special guest in Mr. Kindness, as I think is probably the most popular name to call him, but there's a lot more to him. So he's a former army officer living in the Alps. And I'm excited today because we can speak in depth about a lot of different topics. And I'm excited to see where this goes. But I also know that, Nicol, you're kind of, when I said come onto the podcast, your first one was, you're going to actually get my story out my closet and skeletons out my closet. And I was like, yes. So I'm excited to see where this goes. You got 30 seconds to pitch.
All right. Thanks, Don. It's a pleasure to be on your show. This is the first time I've done a podcast with someone else. I'm used to doing it for myself. I have the Mr. Kindness podcast, MISTER Kindness podcast, MISTER kindness.com. And believe it or not, that is my surname, Kindness. It's quite unusual. Yes, I was an army officer in the Scottish infantry for 9 years, pretty much, and serving in various conflict zones around the world. And then I was working in the oil industry, and I wasn't particularly happy with my life, and I sold my house and packed up my car and drove to a place called Verbier in Switzerland, which is where I live and I have been for the last 17, 18 years. And was a stay-at-home dad for 8 years.
Yeah.
And kind of still am. Do some real estate development and sales and things where I live. But my passion, my hobby is doing podcasts. And so I've done this is actually going to be I've done 124 on my own podcast, but this is a new experience for me, Don, which is
surprising.
Being on somebody else's podcast. And I'm a curious person. I thought if I get a podcast, I can actually speak to people. I can approach people to come and chat with me for an hour and it not sound weird. So that's what I've done. I've managed to get some really fabulous people that come on, very inspiring. So I basically, it's a bit of a personal development like we talked about before. I'm going into ancient history, conspiracy theories, rather. And I do like crazy stories. So we've just clicked back in.
I tell you what, I can edit this out. What should I text him and say?
Bugger off, mate.
I'm
kidding. No, I'm just joking. Yeah, you can cut this out.
I'm not sure why he keeps coming into there. So, really weird things happening here, guys. So if the edit seems a bit funny, it's because we've got another legend that's coming into the podcast that I'm actually probably, I think everything happens for a reason, and I'm going to connect you to.
Perfect.
Because I think there'll be a fantastic story and a possible interview there. So that is, I won't say his name just in case, but yeah, there'll be a future there. So, sorry, do you remember where you're at?
Yeah. I was just saying that I like to have good stories, basically, is what my podcast's about. I like a good story, and I like to be able to discuss. And it's very rare, Don, as you know, it's to actually sit and speak to someone face to face, no interruptions for an hour or an hour and a half or whatever it's going to be, and get to the meat of the subject. And I like it a lot because you gain most of the time you get a really good connection. You stay in contact with these people, and I get some pretty prominent people to come on, and it's one of these things that is a hobby for me, that I get to speak to very cool and interesting people. So for instance, if I approached you in the street and said, can I take you for an hour and have a chat eye to eye with no interruptions, you'd say no. Let's face it. You think I was a whack.
I mean, most people would. I probably would. If I'd say it depends on the time. Like I could be very curious like that, because I think there's nothing better than sitting and having coffee and chatting to a random stranger, because that's where you find so much interest. You've got no expectations, no judgments, no preconceived biases, and you can almost be honest, because the reality is, because they're a stranger, like, you don't realize how they can affect your life in the negative or the positive. So you just are. But I do know what you mean. Like, if you go up to most people and just say, can I chat to you for an hour? They're going to be like, why? You're a bit weird. Yeah.
It's like the oversharing on a night out. Somebody you just met.
Yeah, exactly. So I suppose it's really cool to have you on here. And I had, we might get into conspiracies. We might not. I did say I'm going to introduce you to Alec and Harry. And Alec, I don't know if his numbers changed, or if I just wasn't on my numbers changed list, or I've been blocked, which I doubt it. But one of the things that I would start with is, you've said, what did you do? But I like to unleash the story. So if I said to you who you are, regardless of being a stay-at-home dad and doing some of the day-to-day things you do and everything that, like, how would you describe yourself?
Well, it's one of these things. Self-reflection is not something I'm very good at.
Yeah.
But I've always liked adventure. I like to test. And there's the sun just come out.
Yeah.
To test myself with various, I would call them adrenaline sports. Being in the army, I guess, is a bit of an adrenaline sport. But that, I think, for me, was always an aspect of, I don't know how you'd actually, well, I'll try and describe it, is that it's basically, you're masking what you're actually looking for. And what I've been looking for all my life is meaning, a sense of meaning. The purpose aspect, for instance, the army was a great one for me, because you have a sense of purpose, and you have a goal. You have very clearly defined goals. We call them missions. But even just to get there, I went to Sandhurst, which was quite rare for somebody where I come from to do. And so having to actually step up and push myself, and finding that I had many more gears than I thought I had. You'll know this, you're playing in sport, you think you're a good player at something, and then suddenly you play against a team and you get whipped.
Walloped, yeah.
And then you think, well, I really need to get faster and fitter and up my game. And it's the same thing in the military. And then it's basically, it's trying to find that high you get.
Yeah.
Is that a high?
Well, yeah.
You're trying to find something that gives meaning to your life. And ultimately, I think it all ends up in a sort of a spiritual quest, and you end up in a bit of a spiritual angst, because you're looking for answers and you don't really know how to find them. But I think the more you think about it, the more you listen to yourself, that you start to find the answers. And it still does frustrate me when I ask people who've gained a certain amount of knowledge higher than me, my spiritual advisors, I call them. I say, but how do you do it? How do you do it? How do you meditate? How do you?
Yeah, they never give you an answer.
Your purpose. And they say, well, you just all the answers are within, so you just have to look within, which doesn't work for me. Although I've had some breakthroughs lately. So.
And I suppose those breakthroughs don't come when you're looking for them. They come when you stop looking for them.
Like most things in life.
Yeah.
If you really want something, you think about it nonstop, it doesn't really happen. This is my experience.
Yeah.
When you have an idea, a goal in mind, and it's always there bubbling in the back of the subconscious, I somehow manage to inadvertently arrive at those particular goals. And it could take years, it could take decades.
Yeah.
But it's a bit of, I didn't know what I was doing at the time, but it's a bit of visualization. So I'm not, there's a lot people talk about nowadays is, achieving your true potential and setting goals and being motivated and all that. And I'm not that guy.
Yeah.
I really am not that guy. And I guess from an outsider's point of view, you might look and say that I've achieved quite a lot in my life, but I don't really feel like I have. It's just ideas I've had, things I wanted to do, and have felt compelled to do it. Do you want to go down this road already?
Yes, I do. I'm letting this flow. Go for it.
Okay. All right. So talking about the very subject yesterday is how one feels a compulsion to do something genuinely or generally because your life isn't necessarily going how you think it is. And so, for an example, one of the reasons I joined the army, I always had an idea. I liked the idea of it. And when I joined, I had no idea what it entailed. And I had no idea the hardship. And there's a lot of that. And, there's a lot of knowledge you have to have, and there's a lot more to it. It's a lot more scholarly than you expect, which was a bit of a shock to me. But I was going down a bad path. I was classic. I got into university because I could, one of those guys that could study for a couple of days or even a night before an exam and pass well enough that I can get, so you can get into university. I'm going to university because I was told to go to university. Yeah, I was told, go to university, get yourself a good job.
Was that dad or mom?
And you're set for life, right?
Yeah.
Then you're going to have a happy life, which is, it's probably the worst advice you can give a kid.
Was that dad or mum or outside
everything.
Friend?
It's everything. School,
the narrative.
Friends, and a lot of my friends who didn't go to university are the most successful.
Yeah.
So, anyway, so I didn't have any purpose. I dropped out in the process of dropping out university. I wasn't going to any classes. I was working in a bar, and I was trying to find, what would you call it? An exalted state,
Yeah. Where you were just
bliss.
feeling.
You're going to call it bliss, and it's going to be through drugs and alcohol and sex, which brings fleeting, and it's fun, but
it's the cheap wins,
It's the cheap wins. You have the high highs and the low lows. But so when I got myself into the position where I was probably one of the lowest points in my life, there's been quite a few, but this is probably the winner.
Yeah.
That I felt that if I didn't do something, that it was not going to end well for me. So I needed to do something. And the compulsion was to join the army. And so I joined the army. I walked into the recruiting office and asked to join the army. And the guy looked at me and said, "Okay, which part of the army?" And I went, "I don't know. Were you walking around carrying guns and face to face with the enemy?" And he goes, "Oh, so that's the infantry." And I said, "All right, that's the one I want." And he said, "Do you want to be a soldier or do you want to be an officer?" And I said, "Well, what's the difference?" He said, "Well, you get paid more as an officer." So I said, "I want to be an officer." "And do you have qualifications?" I said, "Yes, I do. I'm currently at university." "Okay, yeah, fine." But the compulsion was there, and for me, the goal was there because I had nothing else to fall back on.
Yeah.
I had no plan B, so there was no way I was going to get kicked out. And the selection process is, it's
brutal.
It's not brutal. It's not.
Yeah.
It's physically, yes, it's demanding, but nothing like what you're going to get. There's the mental aspect, like intelligence aspect, physical aspect, but they know what they're looking for. Because I've been on these as a directing staff. You're looking at these people and you think, right, that person yes, that person no. So they're just testing you to see, but they know what they're looking for. Probably desperate, motivated guys like myself, who are willing to do what it takes to get there, right?
Yeah.
And so you get that aspect, and that's tough enough to get through the first two phases. Then when you get to Sandhurst, they can pretty much kick you out at any time.
What is Sandhurst? Sorry.
Sandhurst is Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, which is where they send the officers. You go there, or potential officers, officer cadets, and then that's where you do. It's like West Point in America, as an example. And so you do that, and you've got to maintain, and everyone gets looked at in great detail, and if they think, this person's okay, he's fine, we'll leave him alone. But that's sleepless nights, stress, and so that's how I got into that, and that was great for me personally.
So can I ask? There's you would have brushed over it, but that lowest of low, is there a particular memory, a time that what I call like an explicit memory that will come up that actually, because you said I had no plan B, I had this, I needed to do it, but that would have been off the back of something that was driving you to like, wherever I go, it doesn't matter as long as it's not there.
Well, I was homeless, if that makes any sense. I wasn't living on the street, right? I was dossing on people's floors. I had no money. I was broke. I was working in bars. That was all money getting spent on having a good time. So I ended up, and I was lucky I was wearing one of these overcoats, like a wool greatcoat type thing, which was fashionable back then. And I was actually sleeping in someone's garage, because I couldn't, I was so tired. I just wanted to sleep. And I remember waking up thinking, now you've hit your low.
Yeah.
You need to do something about this. And it coincided with a breakup. And it was like I was being tested. That's, looking back now, it was clearly a test.
Yeah.
To see, am I going to break or am I going to kick on and do?
Yeah.
But I mean, there's probably a lot more to it. And maybe a lot of it has been blanked out, but it was I wasn't happy.
Yeah.
And I had very little motivation, and I just had, purpose, I think, is everything in life. To have a purpose. And if you don't, it leads to unhappiness.
Yeah.
And when you have no motivation, that's when you basically give up on life. And there's a lot to see, if you understand.
Yeah. And I just want to pick up on the purpose, but so key, because you'll have a lot of people going, I don't know my purpose, I'm not motivated. But sometimes, I mean, correct me if I'm wrong, but you said you're like, I know I need to go to the army, not sure where I need to go, but I'm just going to go with that. And sometimes I think people spend too long waiting to find their purpose before just doing stuff to see where it takes them. Because the more you do stuff, the more you're going to pick up what you do like and what you don't like. Does that resonate? Because a lot of people are like, I'm trying to find my purpose. But that's similar to what we said earlier, is like, well, you look so hard for something that you're not going to find it. Whereas I feel like you just trusted something that you're like, I don't care what it is, but I'm just going to go. And it led you to where you are.
All right. So we really are going down this path now.
Yeah, for sure.
At the time, I didn't realize, but as a kid, I think we might have spoken about this on our podcast, when you came on my podcast, but I was 15, 16 years old. We get these conditioning as kids. We're conditioned from basically birth to fit in.
Yeah.
And go to school, go to university, get a good job, get married, have kids, and then your life is going to be great. Which everyone knows is not the case. There's always going to be pitfalls. There's never a smooth road.
Especially if it doesn't suit your personality too.
No, and I was never, I never felt like I was fitting in. Even though I was quite a popular guy at school, and I could tell funny stories and make people laugh. And I remember one time I was doing it, and I was walking home from school with a bunch of friends, and they're all laughing. I'm telling funny stories. I got home and I started crying. I was in bed crying because this is not me. I'm not a clown. I'm not the funny guy. I'm just trying to fit in, and I don't feel like I'm fitting in. But what you do, you push,
keep going,
clamp all that stuff down, and just get on with it. Work hard. You're going to be successful. That stuck with me, but it goes back to the fact that we get information from who knows where it's coming in, and you have ideas where for me, this was and I say it was a compulsion, and it was a compulsion. It was my intuition telling me that, but it was agreeing with what I was thinking anyway, or whether, I don't know.
Yeah, where it all starts and what it ties in.
If it's my intuition, my guardian angel, I don't know who it is, but something, and it all tied together. And I agree, something has to be done. And the point I was making about, like, I'm not a particularly motivated person, is once you've got that purpose, you will do it.
Yeah.
And that's what I'm saying is, once you've got that feeling, and then you have, it's not a straight line, of course. It's not a straight road. It's going to be lots and lots of curves and
tests,
diversions. But you're on the path. You're on the path towards what you need to do. And it's just taking some very small steps. And I think that's the key thing. But the main thing is, if you have I say compulsion, if you can think of a better word, then by all means. But you have an idea to do something, and if you follow it, you will achieve it. And I'm not saying you have to stab people in the back and get there. It's something you want to do, and I'm not talking about joining the army. It could be starting a podcast. Anything. It could be anything like that.
Yeah, I think it's I agree, and I think it's what we do as people is we forget timeline and context, and where we want to be, we want it much sooner than what it's going to come sometimes. And I think the lack of that patience or understanding is we're only going to get given the things that we're ready for at the time that we're ready for them. And if we try and rush it, it's, if you want to be a millionaire, if you want to grow a company, if you want to start a charity, the universe or whatever you believe in knows what you're going to need to be able to make an effect in that. And so the tests that come en route to that are there literally for you to grow into what you want to be or what you're getting drawn towards. I think sometimes that's where people talk about grit, or they talk about resilience, all that kind of stuff. It's got nothing other than to like accept that where you are on your journey isn't where you're going to end up. But in order for you to be where you're going to end up, you have to keep taking steps no matter what comes in your way. And the acceptance piece, I think you mentioned it's not necessarily about trying to be motivated all the time or be disciplined, but the acceptance kind of runs parallel with that. Whereas whether you're motivated or disciplined or not, if you accept that you're going to work towards wherever it is, no matter how you're feeling, that is almost more powerful than trying to constantly be motivated, because the acceptance is like, oh, I'm not motivated today. It's okay. I'm still going to take a step forward. And I think sometimes we focus so hard on that discipline and motivation that we forget that the acceptance bit is probably key, so that we don't have to rely on those. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And I must reiterate for anyone listening, I'm not saying something like, running an ultra marathon or doing something extreme like joining the military or something like along those lines. It could be writing a book, becoming a poet, selling flowers. It doesn't really matter. If there's something in you that's when you think, I really would like to do this, you have to at least explore it.
Yeah. And I suppose what you've mentioned it there, and a lot of people, maybe especially for my journey, is you talked about intuition, and what you just said is like when you listen to something, just go with it. People really struggle with that concept, because intuition, they it's a really hard thing to hear or feel, because the stuff that I've seen is it's different, presents differently in different people, doesn't it? It's like some people hear a voice, some people feel it, some people see signs. It's about learning to find out what your intuition is and how you follow that, because I think that's where that acceptance will come through, is like, that's in my head, I'm going to go with it, I've accepted it, where some people just brush it off. So how would you help with your experience someone that's listening and they go, I really want this intuition thing, but I've tried to sit down and I've tried to read and I've tried to journal and I don't know how to find that intuition?
Okay, this is so like you mentioned before, it's a voice in your head, a feeling, something, whatever it's going to be. All of the above. It's not just this compulsion. There is that voice in your head. There is the an element of despair, and you hear, you get like maybe some like a flash of inspiration comes to you. Coincidences, something that if you see a coincidence, you think that's a coincidence. I'm very good at not ignoring coincidences anymore. That I have to explore it, even if it's comes to nothing. You just have
even
to.
if it's someone joining a podcast through a link that was mistakenly sent.
Yeah. And he'll be on my podcast, and that will happen. Yeah. But so the signs are there. You just have to keep your eyes open. I think a lot of the problem we have is there's a lot of information and chatter in our heads and in general, and there's a lot of divisive stuff in the media, and it's just this division, and no one's actually speaking to each other or listening to each other, which is another reason why I like to podcast. You can actually sit and listen to somebody who might have an opposite point of view to you, but I listen and hear what they want to say. And that, for me, I learned from that too. So, this is quite an extreme example, but it's quite a funny story. And
go for it.
Pretty sure I told you this anyway, but it's quite funny. So I was I had offered a job, and I wasn't sure if I was going to take it or not. But it was really playing in my mind because it would have involved me. So rather than being with my children, but one of them's at school, one of them's about to go to school, but it would have been them, instead of coming home in the afternoon, the youngest one, and hanging out with me, it would be them going to the creche and hanging out with their friends, which turned out to be a good thing.
Yeah.
It's a very good nursery, play school, whatever you want to call it, after school. So I was in my house, and I actually said, please, looked up to the heavens, or the light in my kitchen, and said, please just give me a sign. Just give me a sign. That's all I'm asking for. And so I did tell you this one, didn't I?
Yeah.
Okay.
I keep going because I can't remember if I told you the version I had too. So
I was driving down. I had to go. So I live in Switzerland. I live in the mountains. It's quite remote. But I needed to go to Lidl, and I can't remember why I had to go to Lidl, but probably buying stockpiling pasta or something. I don't know.
Crisps, yeah.
Yeah. So I was driving down. My daughter was in the back of the car, and we got, like, there's a roundabout on the way there, and there's a crosswalk, a zebra crossing, which I never see anyone on. It's from one side of the road to the other. One side's busy, and the other side's there's fields, basically.
Yeah.
And there's some fella got there, so I stopped, and he walked past me, and he's wearing a red and black checked kind of workman's jacket, like an over jacket. And I thought to myself, I've got one of them. In fact, I've got two of them. That's a cool jacket. I like that jacket. So carried on down to Lidl and went through the whole store, the whole shop, and got to the checkout and realized I'd left my wallet at home. But I thought, that's okay. I have a credit card on my phone, but it was an Amex card, and they don't accept Amex.
Yeah.
So I'm so sorry. I'll come back tomorrow and pay. And they said, you can't do that. So I said, well, I had to leave the basket and left there red-faced. Oh yeah, sorry. When I arrived there's another part of the story. When I arrived at Lidl, I went to get the shopping basket, the shopping cart, and I have this, you got to put in a coin to get it.
Oh yeah.
But I got one, and there was already something stuck in there, so I didn't need the coin. And I went, there's a stroke of luck. I mean, you get the coin back, but you know what I mean. Yeah. Anyways, driving home, and so I went back down the next day. Oh no, so I drove home, went back down the next day. Shopping cart, same thing. It was, I mean, these are big racks of shopping carts, so the chances of getting that again 2 days in the trot were very slim.
Yeah.
So same again, I didn't have to put a coin in, and I thought, hey, that happened yesterday, that's weird. Went around the shop, paid, driving back home. So driving up to that same roundabout, exact same roundabout, but I'm coming in the different direction.
Yeah.
Someone's walking up to the crossing. So I stopped, and it's the guy with the red and black jacket again. And I just started laughing. So there's my sign. However, but what the question is, what's
the sign telling you?
What am I going to do? Is it,
do
I say yes to the job or do I say no? I said yes to the job. So anyway, but that's an example, and I think it's quite amusing because I mean, what are the chances? And
of being aware.
The chances are so slim that you have to, especially after I actually asked out loud.
And also staying, because I think sometimes you ask for a sign and then you forget about it. but actually those signs are going to be reminders of like, what is your decision? And then there's almost another level of acceptance, like, okay, that's the sign, that's the sign. And the decision you make off the back of those was probably the one you were going to make before you asked for help, but you didn't have that acceptance. So you just left it out to something that it was like, just give that, that's just what you need, and you go with it. So I think, yeah, it's fascinating. But what I did want to like, so back onto meaning and purpose, is you've obviously created a nice story from young into hitting rock bottom, into joining army and going to Sandhurst. How has that led into something now where you are finding that meaning or that purpose?
Well, and this is why and I know it can sound a bit trite coming from someone, but that was the start of my life, if you know what I mean. It was, I had to grow up and stop being an overgrown kid.
Yeah.
And pleasure, chasing pleasure, and it's fleeting, short-lived, and you feel terrible afterwards, right? So that was the start of it. It's brought me everything. And so if I hadn't moved, joined the army, I wouldn't have come to where I live now. And I used to come here and do ski race training, weirdly enough, with the army. They're big into sport, but it's great fun. I ended up moving here. My wife and kids grew up here. My kids grew up, born and raised here. So in that aspect of my life, it's brought me everything that I thought I wanted. And we can come back to that, what I thought I wanted.
Okay.
So, when I left the army, I joined. I'd always wanted to do a full ski season, like as a ski instructor, just something I wanted to do. So I did it. I thought that'd be a fun season to have. And it was great fun. And I had a job lined up, so there was no pressure. And I went back to Scotland, back to actually where I came from, and worked for my friend's oil company. And I was there, it was a challenging job, very challenging. I was working offshore, and I had a lot to learn, an awful lot to learn quickly. But I wasn't happy, not with being back in Scotland, being back in my hometown. I was missing the Alps. The Swiss Alps are very beautiful, and there's a big draw to that place. So, I was a year and a half doing that job, and then I just thought, I've got that feeling again. You have to do something. You have to, and I knew what the answer was, and it took me a good few months to pluck up the courage to do it, but I did it. The very loose plan. And I'm not going to lie, I had some dark moments because you're trying to figure out where the money's coming from, and Switzerland's not a particularly cheap place to live. Yeah. And I'm thinking, what am I doing in my life? These dark nights of the soul. So, but you that's where you get the lack of, when you've got a lack of purpose, and but I guess everyone's got it, Don. I don't know what it is. It doesn't matter if you're I think it's part of the path. You got to go through the thick, dark forest to the sunlit uplands.
And that's it. Like you said, that the dark nights of the soul, and I almost still haven't met someone that has it all figured out, that hasn't gone through something.
No.
And it's not about like focusing on hardship, because I think you can focus on hardship and it gets you down, or you can focus on your hardship and realize what a gift it was. But it also makes it, I mean, if you want to give a much shallower example, is if you train for a marathon and you train hard, like that's dark nights of the soul. It's when you finish that marathon, there's very few things that are more rewarding. But if you run a marathon and you didn't really train and you just got through, you finished and that's the hardest thing I've ever done. I'm never doing it again. And I think that's such a good example of in life, you're going to have that same thing, is those hardships you have to go through to get you where you want to be. And if you do, that's why you said purpose and meaning is everything. If you can find meaning in everything, you will, those dark nights of the soul, at one point, even if it's just for 30 seconds, you will be like, I need to go through this. And just that thought is going to help you keep going.
Yeah. But these are not just 30 seconds. This was lying in bed all night. And there's a church not far away from the house, which tolls every 15 minutes. And then it tolls the hours. Like, so if it's 3
The
in the
number
morning,
1, 2,
ding,
3,
so
yeah.
you count, so you can count, and you're lying there awake, and you can hear all the another 15 minutes, another 15 minutes,
Wow.
and so you've got that, and it's just. But I think it's part of the human journey. It's part of the human story. You have to. It's never a straight line. If you even look back on your finances, you'll see there are cycles to your finances. That sometimes you're doing well, sometimes you're broke, sometimes you're doing well, sometimes you're broke.
Yeah.
And it's all a cycle. And I know people who've got lots of money, but this money's tied up in assets, and they're like, scrabbling for cash.
Yeah.
Having to sell some shares, and boo-hoo.
Sorry, I had to lose out
at the same time. When you've got kids at school and you've got to pay the fees and you're behind in the fees or whatever, I don't know, something along those lines, or your mortgage, then that is a problem.
Yeah.
I don't care how much money you've got, that is still a problem.
Yeah. So that brings in Maslow's, doesn't it? Like Maslow's hierarchy. I was once talking about it I like using LinkedIn as like a tester. And someone DM'd me after I said, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. I was like, it's so interesting how this plays out. And they messaged me in a link and they said, it's been debunked. It's not real. And I was like, have you ever gone through those things that he speaks about? Because if you haven't, you won't recognize it.
Yeah. Well, try sleeping a night in the middle of winter in a cold garage with just a jacket on.
Yeah.
Tell me about shelter. Worst thing would be in a park bench or something,
Yeah.
But I was gonna tell you a story, and we got a bit sidetracked. So I did a podcast with a guy yesterday. It's not out yet. A guy I know who moved to Norway with a girlfriend. They had a project. They're going to renovate, live in this fjord, and it didn't work out. This is a very brief synopsis of what he went through. But he saw this farm. I mean, we're talking remote. This is remote.
Yeah.
It's middle of nowhere on a fjord. And he found this farmhouse, bought it on a handshake. It hadn't been inhabited for 60 years. Chatting away with this guy, and he's a good guy, very upbeat, kind of life and soul, good energy kind of guy.
Yeah.
And they actually made Norwegian equivalent of the BBC made a documentary on him, because this crazy English guy living up the side of this fjord.
An abandoned farm. What's he running from?
Well, exactly. So there was, you could only get a quad up there, that road, or so you had to either walk up to it or ski up to it in the winter, because there's obviously lots of snow and ice. But he was up there on his own, and he was so lonely. Let me rewind a tiny bit. He first saw that farm. He had this feeling, a compulsion. He said, "This is where I need to be. This is where I have to be." So he bought the farm, and it all kind of everything came. The stars aligned, and he got this farm. And the guy actually let him have it for a little bit less, and he'd have to pay him back a bit later on. So it all worked out. But he was there. He's been there for nearly 4 years, and he was telling me about the loneliness he went through. And I said, and he was crying. I remember watching the documentary. He was crying. People can see him crying, and he was miserable, and you could see it in his face. I mean, he was struggling, really struggling, because he had no money. He couldn't get a mortgage. But the loneliness was the main thing, and all he could see around him was jobs that needed to be done. There's an old barn, an old house that needs fixed. There's just 1,000 jobs to do, and it was just weighing on him so much. But as part of this land he bought, this farm, there was a cabin on top of a mountain which was relatively new, and he had no running water. He had a bit of electricity in one 13 square meter cabin, right? I know
that was there when he bought the farm.
Yeah, so that 13 square meter cabin, which he was living in, it was on the farm. But there was another cabin which had no electricity and no running water on top of a mountain.
Okay.
And he'd never seen anyone on top of that mountain. So he went up to that cabin. He described it. So this is him lonely, depressed, like serious loneliness. Middle of winter, no one's coming up there. It's very hard to get up there. And he said, "This is the place I go. This is my retreat." And the retreat was into an even more remote and more lonely place. But he had no phone signal. There was no jobs to do. All he could do was sit there and think.
Yeah.
And so what the crux of it came down to was he was depressed. And he was telling me, and I had a breakthrough yesterday, talking to him. So I'm going to
hear about that.
Listen to the podcast. There's obviously a lot more to it, but he would basically sit there either staring at the fire or looking at a candle. He'd light a candle and look at a candle, which unbeknownst to him is a very good technique for getting yourself into an altered state. Yeah,
I'm going to do that.
I didn't realize. Or looking at a plant is another one.
Yeah,
but full concentration on a candle, and so he just all the noise clears, and he started to get answers, right? And he said, "You call it what you want. It's intuition, spirit, God, guardian angel, whatever you want to call it. It doesn't matter. The point being, it's the same thing." And he said, "What I realized, there was 3 voices in there. There was my voice, the voice telling me negative stuff, and then the voice telling me positive stuff. So you're the old angel,
devil
on one shoulder and the angel on the other." And he said, and he had this revelation, was that I hear these voices. There's a negative side and there's a positive side every time. And I said, I am going to concentrate on the positive side as much as I possibly can. And then his life transformed. And then suddenly everything got better. He got money to renovate his house. He was happy. And he was also drinking. He was drinking quite heavily. Quit drinking and had, it all came back to him. So that was a deep pit. And I don't recommend people
do that.
becoming a hermit basically for 3 years.
Just go and watch a candle.
The message came out and it was immediate to me as I looked across my room. There was a pile of fresh folded laundry on the floor, and I walked past it about 5 or 6 times. And he said, it's just little things like that. It's these small wins that you keep doing every day, and they all build up.
Yeah.
And I thought, that is some fantastic advice. So
you started
that podcast will be out soon. I don't know what you think of that. What do you reckon?
No, I love it. So I think the world has leaned way too far into what we can see, believe, analyze, measure, and gone too far away from, if you're watching a candle, you're going to hear some voices in your head and everything's going to get better. And we dismiss those far too easily. Because I do think that sometimes people get it wrong and they do it for show. But you can kind of tell when someone's doing it for show. But I think that is what's needed in the world. Is like, what's your takeaway from today's podcast? Go and sit in a dark room, put a candle in the center and just watch it and watch it and see what happens for yourself. That's the good thing, is you don't need to go and buy anything other than a candle. And that's not going to cost you much. You probably find them at a secondhand store, and go and test it out and see what happens. I was chatting to someone the other day, and as I was chatting to them, I kept saying, I'm making a lot of assumptions here and I'm not sure where they're coming from. And all of a sudden, it was just this top left. I had this thing, and I was like, and I kept, as I was talking to him, I was like, right here is this voice. And then halfway through, I was like, right here's this. And I was like, that's where the negative voice in my head is. So I know where to pinpoint it. And so if I'm trying to think through something, the negative voice comes up. I know I'm like, not listening to you now, because you used to, if you don't know where it's coming from, you think it's coming from everywhere, but actually it's there, and it's there to serve a purpose. That sometimes it's it's going to stop you from doing really silly stuff. Yeah, protecting you. But yeah, I think it's, if you can learn to, that's where you say learn to really trust your intuition. It's actually trusting your intuition is 2 things: is probably learning where the negative voice is and learning where the positive voice is, and using them both, but realizing that the positive voice is the one you want to really follow. Mm-hmm. But that takes courage. It takes bravery. Now, I want to just quickly take you, because I know we can go down that, is you said what I thought I wanted to do earlier. And you said, we'll come back to that.
What was the concept?
Because you said it was about going to Switzerland, then you came home to Scotland.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, because it's my friend's company. The owner of the company is my best friend's dad, who's a friend also. And I was set.
Yeah.
Financially, I'm set for life.
Oh, is that what you thought you wanted to do?
Well, I because I needed a job,
Yeah.
But then, so like I said, this feeling, and I'm sure I guarantee you there'll be people who listen to this and will say the same thing. But I've got, you got a wife and kids. There's outgoings, there's incomings, and it's difficult. I understand, and I know it's quite easy, I guess, coming from a single person at the time to say sod this and off you go. But there's quite a lot of people who have done just what I've done. Families relocated to where I live in the Alps, and because they come here on vacation, and they're saw what happened during COVID in the UK, and well, not just the UK, but talk about soul destroying experience. But here was okay. I mean, you could go out and there's no real restrictions. The bars and restaurants were closed, but that's pretty much it. And you can go walking in the woods, getting into nature and all that. But it's and it doesn't. I'm not talking about selling your house and moving away and like getting a yacht and sailing around the world, which also sounds like fun.
Yeah.
But more like if you're miserable, and there is something like, and it could be, I don't know, it doesn't matter what it is. It's maybe read more, get outside more. It could be anything that you think is a good thing to do, but you just can't be arsed doing it, really. Do you know what I mean?
No, it could be, this is where we tie in that timeline and wanting to so your advice, and I suppose we were trying to like caveat it, like, don't just drop everything you've got and move away.
Yeah, don't do that.
But actually, that's what you're eventually going to do. And the point is, if you start to think about that and start to listen and you start to accept that there is another way than me just sitting here being miserable and not knowing what to do, it's not about changing your life in one day. And it could only, you said it earlier, like whether it took me a year, 5 years, 10 years, it didn't matter. I knew that I knew where I was going to end up eventually, or I knew I would end up somewhere better than where I was. Mm-hmm. And that, I think, is very powerful advice that people don't give, because we're looking for quick wins all the time. So it isn't like, if you're going to lay on your couch thinking about where you're going to be, like trying to lay on your couch and think about listening to your intuition, that's going to be far more powerful than actually burying yourself in the distractions of life.
Yeah. And thinking about it, and my friend who went to Norway said the same thing, is you have, like I say, he said the same thing I always say, is I felt, and I think everyone feels this way, and I mean that, and I genuinely mean this. Everyone feels like they're meant for better things.
Yeah.
I don't think I've met anyone, I probably have, but I don't really think I've met anyone who's not felt. And I'm not saying about, being rich and none of that. I think
important, not, or valued maybe.
Yeah. I think value, or doing something that gives you purpose, and some people love their jobs, and I get that. And I like my job,
Yeah.
It's fun. But and the money aspect is, of course, it's nice to be able to provide your kids with a nice life. We can take a side after that. I'll just make a note. Make a note of this one: is how do you put the resilience into your kids?
Yeah,
when they've given them a nice life, because mine was a bit fraught from an early age. But going back to it, so it's if you feel that way, if you feel like this is not me, I can't just be like this the rest of my life. There must be more to it. There must be another few chapters in the book. Then that is your intuition
sign,
shouting in your ear, saying, "Come on, you're better than this. You can do." And it doesn't, like I said, it doesn't take a lot of effort. It just takes that little idea, that spark becomes,
gets you curious,
gets a little fire going, and then next thing you know, you're on your way to doing something that you want to do. And I said, like, I reiterate the fact that it's selling everything and buggering off. Although that there is a lot of moving to the
that happening
Norwegian mountains, but that's a very good example of intuition. And I have been able to, in my life, realize that I must listen to that voice, that I have to listen to that, act on that feeling. And I have done. Oftentimes it's almost fallen into my lap, but that seems to be how it works. Once you've got the idea, things just start coming your way. And when I was living in Switzerland, I was doing consultancy work, which you probably know is patchy at best. Sometimes it's great, and sometimes feast and famine.
Yeah.
And that's when you have the late nights. And I was doing, because I enjoyed it, I was doing ski instructing in the winter because it's fun and the money's pretty good. I ended up having a ski school. It pretty much fell into my lap, you know? And that became my job for a couple of years. And, you know, what that's a lot of people's dream, you know, and it kind of fell into my lap. But you've got to be in it. You've got to be in the position. You've got to be, you know, a ski instructor for a start. You've got to be living in the right place.
Yeah, be in the right place, the right time. Yeah.
Then things start falling into place. And, you know, it just seems to be how it works, Don. It seems to be that the work, when you have this idea and you start taking the small baby steps towards it, and that's all it really takes is thinking about it and maybe reading a book about it. And then you maybe read another book or search the internet, whatever, watch a movie about it. And then things will happen. And I don't know what it is, but I happen to believe that we're here to enjoy ourselves. We're here to find meaning and purpose and our true, I guess, role or place in life.
Yeah.
And it comes from, you know, that soul-crushing commute on a rainy day in February, stuck in traffic, and you're tearing your hair out going, what the hell am I doing? Or stuck in a crowded tube, or freezing your arse off on your bike because you can't afford a car, which I've done all these things, right?
Yeah.
And you think there must be a better way. And you have to figure out what that better way is for you.
Yeah.
Right.
And like we always use the analogy in my head, I always use it, is something that gives me strength or grit or resilience in the moment is this is just a chapter. And what's your book going to be like when you write it? And that is almost excites you because it's like, okay, how am I going to take everything in? How am I going to say I overcame the odds in this? And then you go back to life. But if you can keep reminding yourself that you're writing a page in your book so that by the time you're 70 or 80 or 90 or 200, by the time everyone gets older and AI has done something with it, you can actually look back with pride and go like, wow, I came through a hell of a lot and it was so meaningful. Here's my book, learn from it. Mm-hmm. And I think that for me is like the ephemeral, you know, bigger than yourself kind of outlook. Is it's that book isn't to make you rich. That book is to help someone else read what you went through, to speed up what they're going to go through, or give them faith or resilience to go through things, because I know on the other side of it, there's that contentment or joy that people find.
And also being true to yourself, I think, is important. And I mean, what do I mean by that? Is trying to walk a straight line. I mean, there's a lot of temptation out there, people. I know I've been tempted, still am, of course. There are temptations all over the place. And, you know, I like to think when I'm feeling bad that I'm maybe not achieving, you know, what I should be doing. And I still don't know what I'm supposed to be achieving.
Yeah.
But, you know, who knows?
Feel good on the route.
Think about really famous movie stars from the 70s or the 60s. You probably can't really think of many, but there would have been loads.
Yeah.
Dozens, if not hundreds, of very famous actors, actresses, comedians, what have you. But we don't really know any of their names. They might have been who's the most famous person from 1920 or 1880?
Yeah.
We don't know. So I think we also fall into a trap of judging ourselves against others, which I think it's so bad for you.
Yeah.
And I've been quite, I guess, blessed with the ability to not. Of course you do, but it's how much, you know,
it's not your go-to.
Envy that person? I don't envy anyone. Used to when you're young and stupid. I would love to be a rock star, and then you realize that most of the rock stars are heroin addicts because they've got everything they want in such a young age. It destroys them.
Yeah.
Their path, that's their path.
Yeah.
Some of them can't handle it and they die. Some of them get through it and come out the other side, you know? I'm just trying to make it as straightforward and as simple for people that when you do embark on whatever the challenge is, whatever you want to do, is it's not just plain sailing. There's going to be hard times, and I said it might take years, but that's life. There are going to be ups and downs.
But you mentioned being true to yourself. And I think how I was going to ask a question, but you kind of answered. I want to highlight it is, how do you know you're being true to yourself? And what you said after that is you're not comparing yourself to anyone else but yourself.
Yeah.
But how would you have answered that?
I think I think everyone's has it built into them, is to know the right thing to do. And I don't think you need to go Sunday school or anything like that to understand that, which I did as a kid. You get given you don't have to read the Bible. You get given a crib list, the 10 Commandments. And I thought, I'll try and adhere to most of all of them. But, there is that. But I guess they call it a moral compass, is knowing. But again, you have to go way off,
peace to know that,
before you find out what your moral compass is.
So that's an important point. You have to go way off to know that you're way off. So bringing in acceptance again is like, we try and be perfect and like, I'm living by my moral compass, and then you go off of it and you go like, I can't tell anyone because now that's shame and guilt. But actually, it almost is acceptance of like, hi, I know I'm off of it. Look at me, guys. I'm off my moral compass. I'm going back onto it now. And I think a lot of people feel like there's like social shame, and then there's personal shame, and then there's guilt, and then there's guilt. Is we far too much overthink the social shame that comes with going off our moral compass, and everyone hides that. And all we've got is a layer of social shame, like anti-social shame, where everyone's doing these things and they're avoiding being themselves because they think that it's not okay to say, yeah, I swore, yeah, I smoked yesterday and I didn't mean to, and how's that going to come across? But realistically, I smoked yesterday, I hated it, and it veered me off who I really want to be, and now I'm back on that, and it's great. And I know tomorrow I might do the same thing, but as long as I keep recognizing and moving either side of it, I'm be on the right track more often than not.
Yeah. I was talking to a friend about this just in passing, about how having guardrails either side of you. And when I was growing up in my teens and 20s, my friends were still very good friends. I don't see them very often, but we have a WhatsApp group, which is great. We're always chatting on, telling stupid stories and jokes and what have you. And they were a wild crew. And I didn't really, I was attracted to the wildlife. I mean, I was taking part, but I wasn't really, I was more of an observer.
Yeah.
Taking notes, like, I don't want to go that far. I'll go this far, but not that far. And then on the other side, you're like, yeah, that's really
not far enough.
That's a bit too far for me. But you get that, and it's kind of like you're bouncing between the guardrails until you get a bit older and a bit wiser, and that you realize that if I go and do what I did now at my age with a wife and kids, then your family's going to fall
severe
apart,
consequences.
Right? Yeah. You can't go on a 4-day bender and not hear,
some people still do. Maybe you should listen to it. Yeah.
Some people still do. And, you can't just jump on a plane with a toothbrush and no luggage and go to, I don't know, Budapest for a weekend.
Yeah.
That's not going to work, right? So you have to do the right thing. But I think it's more the feeling you get. If you ask me, it's if you're being selfish and mopey and angry because your family are bothering you and whatever, and you're down, but you're having an effect on them, and they're kind of feeding off you. I'm talking about me.
Yeah.
And you think, why are you being such a pain in the neck? And realize it's actually that energy is coming from me.
Yeah.
And that's it's a good thing about having kids is you see your bad behaviors reflected. You see your kid, your son, talking to
mirrors everything.
It sounds like me, and I think, oh, do I really talk like that? That's horrible.
Like, so where did you get that from? You're like,
yeah,
I know.
Like, where did you get? And like, he looks at me.
Yeah,
where are you getting that swearing from?
But so do you know one thing I feel having kids and just trying to be aware of how you come across is, I think we're all very bad at actually truly identifying our own emotions, and that's why it's hard to control them. So, people, you could describe anger and you could feel anger because it's such a strong emotion. But what about those emotions that we feel before we get to the angry stage. And we've never learned to identify them because they're not strong enough, like frustration, because a need's not being met, like, are you not getting enough love? But instead of recognizing that there, you build into the frustration and then you lash out because you're angry. So anger is almost like the end result of not knowing your own emotional state. And it was because I was chatting to my wife yesterday, even about love. I was like, how do you actually know what love feels like? Because you've only ever been described. You only ever go by excitement or, if it's a dopamine attraction thing. But that love that everyone speaks about, like, how do you know when you've actually got it? Because no one can describe that feeling the same way that you would feel it. You just, you can see it in other people. And you're like, oh, yeah, I love someone. I love my kids. I love this. But how do you get to know how that actually feels? And I think that's when I asked that, I was like, it's actually quite an interesting question. And that applies to all other emotions, is we can describe them, but there's a core to them that perhaps we're not aware of. And that's why we struggle to communicate.
Yeah. I think it's, if you were to ask me, and this came into my head just now, it's unconditional acceptance of the other person. And of course you need to, if your children are errant, going down a bad path,
put some guardrails in.
Or, a little chastisement is what's necessary. And sometimes it's quite severe, like a good bollocking.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's just watch that, But what I think for me, the anger, because apparently my father has a short fuse, or had. His grandfather had a short fuse. His father, sorry, we're going
and so on and so on.
Had very, very short fuses.
Epigenetically, you've got the short fuse thing.
Yeah, there is that. But we can turn these genes on and off apparently nowadays. It seems to be the science is telling us.
Yeah.
But it's hard to do. But for me, I let it build up.
Yeah.
And I keep it. I don't talk about it. I keep it. You being a good, male from the 70s, 80s. You just don't talk about your emotions. You keep them tamped down, right?
Yeah. Push
it down, and then of course it's going to explode. I still do it.
Yeah.
I still, lose my shit. It comes out. You're like, where did that come from? Then I'm fine, but feel terrible.
Yeah.
For the rest of the day, it's like anything that happens like that is, you always feel awful afterwards, and that's why I try and catch myself before I.
Yeah. So I was listening to "Love Yourself Like Your Life Depends on It" by Naval Ravikant, I think his name is.
Yeah, Naval Ravikant. Yeah.
Ravikant, yeah. And I'm listening to that book, and it was very good describing of that social shame, and then you feel self-shame, and then there's guilt. And so like what you were speaking about there is you get angry and you feel bad, which is guilt. Like I feel guilty about that behavior, but it's make sure that you're not feeling shame about self, because then you're not unconditionally accepting self or anyone else. So like, it's okay to recognize the difference. And I think a part of healing is recognize that if you're feeling self-shame, you need to love yourself more and be kinder. But it's okay to feel the guilt about behaviors, because those are things that you don't want to do, but you're not tying them to you, you're tying them to a behavior. And just that subtle difference can make a huge, huge positive result in how we see ourselves.
Yep. But it's tough. Life is tough. I don't care who you are.
Yeah.
There's always something going on. But it's how we deal with it, I think, is the lesson learned for me is, how do you deal with the hardship? Do you go deeper into the hole, or do you try and climb your way out of it? At least by scratching the walls, you're putting a few inches of dirt on the ground that you can get a bit higher.
Yeah.
That's what I mean. It's just that it doesn't, build a ladder and get out. It's small things, just very, very small changes. And with a goal in mind, I think is very powerful.
And like I think you said it earlier, it's like it doesn't have to be a defined goal of £5,000 a month or 3 friends. It's just something in the future that tethers you to there, so that you're
subconscious, your chimp, your brain, yourself knows that it's working towards something.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
It's often I've noticed is a case of getting out of your own way.
Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think when I hear people talking about 5-year plans, how can you do that?
Yeah.
This is my opinion. Okay.
No, it's a personality type too, by the way. So yeah.
Oh, is it? Okay.
Yeah.
Got me. Is how we don't know. There is no such thing as the future.
Yeah.
There isn't. There's the time is, time is a construct based on this planet going around the sun, and we used it for mathematics and things. That's time. There is no time. If you think about it, there is absolutely no time. There is no future. There is no past. This is where it sounds kind of new agey, and I don't mean it to sound like that. Is what you do now, right?
Yeah.
Now, is how your path will play out.
Yeah.
And I like to, and I can't remember where I read it, or who I might have been.
As long as you try and reference something, then at least they know that you weren't trying to claim it as your own. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm definitely not claiming it as my own.
Yeah.
But it really
not that it
resonated with me. But I think it might have been Autobiography of a Yogi by Paraham. Oh my God, I can't remember the name of the guy. But it's Autobiography of a Yogi, it's called, and it's a very famous book. Well, you'll find it on Amazon, no problem. But was that and he was from India, who came to he was one of the first ones to come to the West and was preaching.
Brought his stuff over, yeah.
Yeah, the Buddhism aspect of, well, the Indian, the Eastern way. And it was that there's an infinite number of universes and an infinite number of dimensions, and everything is happening at the same time. So there could be me, in a different timeline somewhere over there, and it's me who's playing international rugby for Scotland as a flanker.
Yeah.
And there is a path there. I can see that path there. It's way the hell over there, and it's going to involve it for me getting stretched out in Iraq and a lot of steroids.
Yeah.
And a youth serum
before you go into competition. Yeah.
Before you go into competition, of course. And I wasn't, of course, I wasn't. That was probably a bad example.
No, go with it. It's fine.
You know what I mean? But
yeah.
Everything you have all these possibilities. It's just how hard are you willing to work to get there?
Yeah.
And how
badly do you want it?
How it's not even how badly you want it. It's if you can see yourself being that person in quotes future, it's already there. You just have to shimmy your way across there, leopard crawl, run, sprint.
Yeah, I like it. It brings your point in. Is not. I like it. Not how badly you want it. How much have you accepted that it's yours?
Yeah, and I think anyone could be a billionaire.
Yeah,
but I would love to be a billionaire. Would you be willing to
at what cost? Yeah,
what the cost, personal cost, to become that billionaire? It's a lot. I mean, I take my hats off to these people because it's not something that many people can do, and that's why there's so few of them.
Yeah.
Same for anything like pro rugby player. Are you willing to put your body on the line, get smashed up?
Well, you know what? I think that that's the easy part. You go down that route. Like, are you like? I often think back to some. I wouldn't say you got to be careful of using the word sacrifice as much as like doing whatever it takes. But uni's famous for going to uni, having drink at the parties and all that kind of stuff. And I remember my first week in uni, there was 5 days of partying that my whole res went to, and there was like these reses, and I had training 3 days that week, and I didn't go to the parties while everyone else is going out at like 4:30 drinking. I'm sat in my dorm room going, I got training in 2 hours. I can't go out and drink. And they all go out till 2 a.m, and I come back and I'm having breakfast, all fit and ready to go, and not being able to drink because I want to make a thing of rugby. And I think those are the unheard of sacrifices that wouldn't actually tell a massive story. Like no one would be like, oh, but everyone does it. But those ones are the hardest ones to do because there's the little things that add up.
Yep, exactly.
Yeah.
And that's what you have to do. right? If you want to be successful as a you got to be willing to do what the other person won't do, because I guarantee you there's probably some of your teammates out there going for it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, and
I realize we're an hour and 10 in. I just want to ask you maybe 3 quick fire questions, and then we'll finish off. So what scares you the most?
Nothing really.
Nice.
What scares me the most is if I don't really. I mean, Armageddon. That scares me the most. Sharks. I'm scared of sharks.
Yeah, me too. That? And crocodiles.
But anything that can eat me or kill me, I have a healthy respect for, shall we say?
Yeah. Okay, I like it. Me too.
I'm not really. No, I don't really.
Okay.
I'm not.
You've accepted.
I've answered like that before, but
no, different answers. There are a few people will say that, and then sharks and crocodiles comes up, and then it's fine. In as quick a way possible, what's the hardest bit that no one knows about that you've been through?
It's the hardest. Nothing really comes to mind.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, briefly speaking, I think it's more of a being in a horrible situation. They're all bad, and trying to grade them is quite hard to do for me.
Yeah.
Getting your heart broken, that's a horrible situation.
It is yeah, exactly. There's love that brings in love.
Yeah, there's a lot that's a podcast on its own. That's just
Is it?
That's your ego effing with you.
Yeah.
That's just pure ego.
So when was your heart first broken?
I was about 21, 22, something like that. But it was the best thing that ever happened to me. That was another spur to get on with my life. It was a big spur in my life because I think I hate to say this, but I think everyone needs to go through it, because that is the ultimate ego death, or knowing that you haven't got.
Yeah.
I know this is not as brief as you wanted it to be, but it's
no, I like it. It's fine.
Death of your ego, and I'm not talking about your ego as a looking in the mirror and all kind of stuff. I'm talking about the ego that's there to protect you. That's the negative voice saying, "Don't do that. That's going to be difficult." It's there. Serves a purpose. The ego is there to protect you. It's trying to protect you. That's why you've got the balance. You've got to take a bit of risks, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
But I think having that heartbreak, and then it took me 20 odd years, 30 years to actually figure out what it was, why it affected me like that, is because my ego was basically torn and ripped asunder. It wasn't my heart; it was my ego. And do you
want to just expand? I mean, we'll give another couple of minutes. Do you want to just expand on that, so someone that's resonating with what you're talking about now?
Well, when it happened, like for instance, you're a tough guy, you're 22 years old, you think you know everything, you're full of juice, ready to go, and then what you think, you're a beautiful girl, everything's great, you feel fantastic, you have the drugs and all I say drugs.
Dopamine and everything.
Yeah, the dopamine and the serotonin and all that's blasting through, and you feel great. And that's the kind of the Hollywood version of love.
Yeah.
That's a relatively modern concept of how things. It was a lot more practical in the past, and basically arranged marriage. But there was obviously an attraction there. But to have your world come crashing down, and everything you thought, and the whole reason that you want a beautiful woman on your arm or a beautiful man on your arm is for your ego.
Yeah.
And it's nice to look at. Don't get me wrong, but that's your ego telling you what to do, and to have that just rent asunder, and you are open, exposed, lying in bed for a week, can't get out of bed because but it's a devastating thing to happen. But I thought it was, because you've seen it on movies and stuff, I thought, it was genuinely your heart breaking. You can feel it in your heart, of course.
Yeah.
But I now realize it's your ego getting a gigantic kick up the backside.
When you look at it from the outside, it's so much easier when you look at it from the outside, doesn't it?
Yeah. And if someone had I mean this, and I'm I'm being serious. If someone had explained that to me, I said, "What, if like, why am I hurting so much? I don't deserve this." But yes, you do.
Yeah.
And that's
Your
your
ego
ego
needs
took
it.
control. And now this is what it's like to have that ego be taught a lesson.
Yeah,
And
I think that I've got a poster on my back there that says the root of suffering is attachment. So it's like it's detaching yourself a little bit from your ego, and that was a Buddha saying, I think.
yeah, well, I guess that's it, isn't it? It's you projecting yourself through others,
Yeah,
and to have that ripped away from you, it's very hard.
yeah,
It's a horrible experience. I still think about it sometimes, and I laugh. I actually speak to I'm still kind of friendly with the girl. We reconnected years ago, but yeah, she's like, "You're so crazy."
the fact that you can laugh at it's a good sign.
I
isn't
know,
it?
I know,
Yeah.
I know, and a lot of people can't.
Yeah.
I understand that.
Go and read Who Moved My Cheese if you can't laugh at things. It's a good book to read.
It's having the it's a good life lesson.
Yeah.
It's horrible. It's horrible. Anyway, what was question 3?
Question 3 will be a lot simpler. Is if someone's listening and they can implement anything and they want to find meaning and purpose, what's that takeaway for them?
My takeaway from that is be open to accepting that there is a higher power in the universe. There is a creator. You can call it what you want. People are afraid to say God.
Yeah.
I'm kind of loath because people go,
as soon as you say it, then they switch off.
God botherer, whatever.
Yeah.
And it's not. If it's not like that. Once you start to understand what's going on, is to and I don't know why I've just said it. I don't know how many. A lot of people are going to listen to this, but I live my life by that daily. I try to anyway, certainly. And it's things like meditation. It's the meditation, which is effectively the same as prayer. If you're saying,
yeah, I agree. I say the same.
What's the your devotions, your daily devotion? I forget what they call them. The new agey way of saying it.
Oh, why have I forgotten now?
Yeah, you know what I mean.
Affirmations.
Yeah, that is a new way of saying prayer.
Yeah.
Right. And the seeking a higher power, whatever, that's just the same way of saying God. But whatever, it doesn't matter what you call it. But ignore your programming, ignore the conditioning, ignore the propaganda. And I think once you open your eyes to this stuff, your life definitely gets better. And I'm not talking about going to church.
Yeah.
I'm not talking about talking to a priest or anything like that. I'm talking
go to the cabin. Yeah.
Going to the cabin, or even just a quiet place. Just sit and be quiet and see what happens. And trust me, I was the most skeptical man up until just relatively recently.
Yeah,
relatively recently. So that's my one thing is it's just having a bit of faith, not just in the creator. It's actually having a bit of faith in yourself.
Yeah,
and the universe, whatever people call it nowadays, but it does have benefits.
Whatever you call it, it's just not you only. Yeah.
That you're not on your own. Absolutely not on your own. And we're all the same, different colors and sizes and what have you, but we're all the same thing.
Yeah.
And it gives you a perspective on life, which is, I think,
needed.
Much more palatable.
Yeah.
And needed. And you're not alone.
Yeah.
Loneliness.
Agreed.
Go back to that.
Yeah. Go and watch. Have you seen that Into the Wild?
Yes.
The movie? Yeah. Fantastic movie. It's a really good movie to watch about loneliness. Okay. So Nicol, thank you very much for coming on. I really appreciate, you giving your time and giving some insight and, being on my podcast and being able to tell your story. So hopefully we will revisit this again in the future. I know that there's always a lot more to talk about, but if people want to follow you, we'll put show notes in the description, all that kind of stuff. And we will, we'll release the episodes and you guys will see it coming out. So thank you very much. I really appreciate you.
Well, I appreciate you coming on mine, and I look forward to putting you in the seat. And actually it was quite cathartic for me today to be in a position to be grilled for a change.
Yeah.
Nice question, but I really appreciate it. That was very insightful for me as well. take a lot of
Okay.
lessons. Sometimes you just have to hear yourself say things before you realize that you're thinking these things. So
Yeah, that's why talking
great
is
pleasure,
important.
and
Yeah.
thanks for having me on, bud.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Cheers.
See you soon.